record right now. So today's lecture, we are talking about extraction and a bit about California's statehood. We will get into some of we talked a little bit about the legality surrounding statehood last time, but I will bring it up again for the next lecture as well, because California's statehood is a little sticky. So it is technically in September of 1850. However, there was a whole bunch of Euro-American folks in California in the throughout the 1840s, partially because of settlement with the Californios, partially to do other kind of American settlement colonization. We did talk about Manifest Destiny and the US's kind of determination to go literally from sea to shining sea, the determination to make sure that the US had total control of the land, and by controlling both sides of the ocean, they would be in a better situation to protect themselves from any sort of invasion. So California becomes a state in 1850. However, there was a lot of US military infrastructure. So you have a lot of US military, you have the federal government basically encroaching on the territory, like the area of California that became a territory and then became a state between 47, legally 48, but really 47 until it becomes a state September 1850. So, we talked a bit about that last time. We'll talk a bit about it more this time. But today we're really focusing on extraction, because that has really been a refrain for the history of California. When we talked in the first week about what is Santa Barbara, you watched and we talked about the leisure aspect of this beautiful Mediterranean coast. We talked about how it's understood as a tourist site. We also talked about some of its extraction, but and when we consider the broader history of the state, so the state of California beginning in 1850, technically, to the present, it has really been a history of natural resource extraction. I know, buddy. I know that's a really painful pill to swallow. It is such a beautiful place, buddy. I know. How can we, extract so much from this place? But part of the reason why California is so beautiful is its natural resources. And there are so many different ecosystems. There are so many different kinds of resources that California as a state is able to balance all sorts of different industries all at once. One, because it is huge, but two, it just has so many different things to offer. It isn't like we just have rangelands, so we can only raise cattle. We don't only have forests, so we aren't just a timber state. We don't just have minerals to mine, even though we have a lot of it. So all of that is to say, since the very beginning of the state being a US state, and the gold rush that happened right before California became a state, which is no accident. The US had, even though gold was famously found in 1849, we're going to get into this further, but the point of California for a lot of its history is that it has a lot of natural resources to extract. And so we're going to be talking about gold today. We're also going to be talking a little bit more about westward expansion. So how are these folks getting here? We're going to talk a little about the Oregon Trail, which I'm always excited to talk about. I don't think it gets talked about enough. So we're going to get started. So as I said before recording our midterm updates, please hold. They will be graded by this upcoming Sunday. Thank you for your patience. The stock picture is basically a trendier version of me. I just have a lot of papers on my desk, some that I don't even know why they're on my desk, but I have lots of grading. I really super appreciate your patience. I believe Doug asked earlier, again before it was recording, when week 2 is going to be graded, and that was, I needed to have that done. I wanted to have that done by this weekend. It did not happen. It will get done by today. Again, thank you so much for your patience. I have had uh, a larger wave of work that I've been attending to that doesn't have to do with these classes, that has taken away some of my time, but I will catch up with that by tonight. When if you don't see it by 8, know that it is still coming, because I usually work until midnight at least. So so just keep that in mind. And tomorrow's lecture, I have every intention of showing this same Shutterstock picture of a white woman with blonde hair and too much on her plate, and telling you that at least the second weekly assignment is graded. So our pet for today, something more fun. Our pets are Rocco and Romeo. Romeo, I believe, is the smaller one, and I'm so sorry that I am blanking on who posted it, but they're just little brothers. They're probably not really, but we don't talk about that. But you can be adopted and be family, and they love each other so much. Look. Okay. Um let's just enjoy them for like 5 more seconds in silence. What joys, what delights. Yes, Giselle, I completely agree. So today we are talking about how all of these Euro Americans really got to California. We talked a bit about it last time. A lot of it had to do with California's offering really cheap land grants that were bought up by people with means, and then cut up into even smaller grants that could be bought basically by anybody who could get to California. So at the end of the Mexican American War, so in the 1840s, the US gained control of Mexican territories in the West. So this also included the present day state of California. And American settlements in California increased slowly at first. Like I said, it was mostly, people who would take the gamble of getting a land grant that was, given under or given through another country that was not theirs. But when gold was discovered, the population quickly grew, and there was an economic boom. So before we get into that economic boom, let's talk a little bit about how these folks are getting here, though. So we have the California and Oregon trails. So in the 1820s and early 1830s, there were lots of different ways that Euro-American people would get to California, but there was a stabilized collection of paths that were called the California and Oregon Trails that Americans took who wanted to move to California. And so it started with the Oregon Trail, and then they would take a southern route that would eventually meet the Snake River in present day Idaho. And then the California Trail ran through the Sierra Nevadas, which we can not see on this map, but picture it going this way. Um, uh, you, the California Trail, ran through the Sierra Nevada mountain range. American immigrants and traders on the California Trail try to cross these mountains before the season's first snows. Though the travel across the Oregon and California trails was very, very, very important to time out, because you did not want to get snowed in. There were many groups that had lots of awful things happen to them, but one of the most awful things that could happen to your group is that you get snowed in and have none of the things that you need. So on the Oregon Trail, like I said, lots of bad things happened. There could be awful weather. There could be really bad food. All of these things could really affect your health. Disease was rampant. Disease from, you know, encountering animals that you hadn't experienced before, eating or drinking the wrong things, led to a lot of fatalities on especially the Oregon Trail. California Trail, slightly easier, but most folks had to do the Oregon Trail first before they could do that. So the Oregon Trail was also made popular by the 90s computer game of the same name, Oregon Trail. I found this the graphics were very much like, the graphics were basically this, and when I found it online and it has my legal name, I just had to share it with you. It's a very fun game, and they have emulators of it online if you want to get super duper nerdy. One of the most famous people who did the Oregon and California trails was the Donner Party. Out of all of the history of this part of westward expansion, they are some of the most talked about because they had some of the worst things happened to them. So the Donner Party was a group of Western travelers who went to California, but they were stranded on the California Trail in the Sierra Nevada mountains during the winter. If you've ever been by Lake Tahoe, this is Donner Pass. So when the Donner Party reached the Sierra Nevada mountains, they became trapped by heavy snows. So they tried to take a shortcut. It did not work. They tried another thing and they got even more stuck and had almost no food. So rescue party found them starving and freezing in February of 1847. And while there were 87 travelers, 42 of them have died. So almost exactly half. What makes them so famous, besides the death, is that or so much death, is that they had to resort to eating the dead of their party. So they had to resort to cannibalism in order to survive. This is the kind of spectacle that makes campfires even more lively, that scares children into maybe following directions a little better, and overall just really illustrates the horror of what can happen if you are not prepared, and as well as the risk involved with getting to these Western territories. So I have a quick little video that gets into more of it with really cool, I think, archival footage. So we're going to watch it right now.
Hello and welcome to History Pod. On the 12th of May 1846, the Donner Party departed Independence, Missouri on their ill-fated journey to California. The 1840s had seen a dramatic increase in the number of pioneers undertaking the long and dangerous journey to settle in the western United States. The California Trail shared its initial stages with the 2,170-mile Oregon Trail, but after reading about a shortcut in a new guidebook by Lansford Hastings, a party led by George Donner and James F. Reed decided to take this alternative route. The group of 20 wagons, which carried almost 90 people, found the Hastings Cutoff to be considerably rougher terrain than they had been led to believe. Slowed by steep inclines and the need to fell trees and move rocks to provide a path for the wagons, the group struggled to cover more than 1.5 miles a day, compared to the 15 that they might have expected to move on the established trail. By the time the party had crossed the Wasatch Mountains and had reached the Great Salt Lake Desert, they were running out of food and water. Families were forced to abandon their animals and, in some cases, even their wagons on the inhospitable plain. By the time they rejoined the main trail route, it's therefore estimated that the Hastings Cutoff had cost the group a month's travel time. This was to have catastrophic consequences, since by the time they reached the Sierra Nevada mountains, the group found the trail to be blocked with snow. Forced to spend winter in the mountains, by January some of the families were so short of food that they'd resorted to eating the ox hides that acted as roofs for their cabins. A snowshoe party consequently set out to find help on a 33-day journey that saw them resorting to cannibalism to survive. Although the survivors were rescued, almost half the people who had originally set out from Missouri had died.
So like I said, death on the path to westward expansion was pretty common. However, the Donner Party is the most famous of these because of the need to resort to cannibalism. That was not common, but even on the most successful of journeys, people still died, especially the elderly and especially children. Um, there have been collections of, I mean, besides histories, there are collections of diaries that have been published since, you know, even still recently, that you can read about just the, I don't know, like the destruction of families and the destruction of land, also the killing of indigenous folks all across all across the West. It was a path of pain and suffering and lots of blood. And while it can capture the minds, especially through fiction and especially for kids of the 80s and 90s, of you know, with computer games, it isn't, it was harder than that. Exploration always seems very fantastical, right? And the explorers that we talked about before have had different kinds of movies made about them, and or just exploration and colonization in general, you know, can seem like an adventure. But hopefully by this point of the class, it is also clear that that adventure also was not covered, but just had so much death and so much fear. And so that's something that I kind of want you to, take with you. Oh, nope, nope, nope. Next slide. Next slide. Nope, next slide. Okay. So we talked about how people got here. What is extraction? So extraction, simply put, is taking something out of something else. So the first example that comes to my mind is dermatologists call pimple popping extraction. They are taking sebum and oils out of your skin. Extraction, that is one way to use the word, but a lot of times extraction is used to describe the different kinds of industries that take natural resources out of the land. So logging, mining, oil especially, all of these are different industries that are taking natural resources out of their ecosystems to do something else. Uh, Depending on how it's done, agriculture, different kinds of farming can be understood to be very extractive, which is to say that this word is really broad. Um, yeah, but as I said at the beginning of this recording, extraction is and has always been inherent to the state of California. We have so many different natural resources to choose from. We have so many different kinds of ecosystems across our really huge landmass that there's and because of how they're spread out, some are very hard to get at. Some natural resources, while very tempting, will not work. For example, you cannot log a giant sequoia, though people tried. But for the most part, a lot of these natural resources were accessible and were seemingly just there for the taking. And so when gold was found, um, it wasn't just the gold that was being extracted, but lots of other resources to make a landscape into a town, into a city, into a port of call, uh, and then eventually a a huge network of the different areas that we now know today. So got another person in the waiting room. Okay, great. So what was extracted in California? Like I said, any and all natural resource that could be beneficial to building towns and cities, because gold really changed everything. So here is a look at a mining town. I'm sorry, that is a little blurry, but you can see, these are just little hardwoods. I don't think they're obviously not like redwoods. They're not big or tall enough, but you see a lot of clear cutting, and you see clear cutting because how were they to go from tents to actual buildings? How were they to create different kinds of roads connecting different mines and different towns without cutting things down? How were they to access food and water if not being able to get to either, clean water resources or into town to get other goods like clothes? So extraction is never just one item, it is lots of items. So why is this part of California history important? Because it made California even more tempting as a future state. So especially in the late 40s, again, not technically a state until 1850. All of these different things, many people from like many Euro Americans believed that it was their God-given right to take the resources and make the land more useful. Not only was it their God-given right, but also what God wanted them to do. They believed in a very specific sense of progress, one that I think we can today more see that it was very self-interested and short-sighted, but they believed what they were doing was not only right but good, morally correct. This is also an important part of California history because it, in a sense, created a California dream. So we have the building of an American dream, you know, really from the beginning. What is America, and what is the U.S.? It is a place of freedom. It is a place of chasing your dreams. It is a place of having, you know, having a sense of stability and a sense of legacy by having a house and having a place to enrich yourself, etc. Buddy doesn't agree with this American dream and he's calling it into question right now. So similarly, we have an idea of the California dream that held that, Buddy, I know it is also not a good dream either, but they still believed that California was a place to achieve your dreams. It was a place to to build, to recreate, to do what they needed to do to get what they needed. And what they needed, again, tied to that American dream, was a sense of stability and a sense of, you know, possibility for creating some sort of legacy. Sorry if you have you could, if you're live and you have my screen also going while I've been talking for the last 30 seconds. I had to leave because Buddy was just barking a whole bunch. So this California dream, you know, while again self-interested, also impacted lots of other things, and even more importantly than the natural resources that they extracted, continued to heighten tensions between Euro Americans and indigenous people and Mexican people. So let's talk about the California Gold Rush. So when Mexico controlled California, Mexican officials did not want any Americans to settle there. However, in 1839, they did give the Swiss immigrant John Sutter, you may be familiar with his mill, John Sutter, permission to start a colony. It was thousands of acres. It was located near the Sacramento River. It became a popular rest stop for many American immigrants. So people leaving basically what was one part of the U.S. to another part of the U.S. To another part of the landmass that then became the U.S. In late 1847, Sutter hired James Marshall to build a sawmill on the American River to provide lumber for Sutter's growing ranch. So Sutter had thousands of acres. He had lots of resources. He was creating different smaller plots of land. He was trying to make his area into not only a colony but also a business, right? He wanted to enrich himself by not only, you know, making a little township possible, but by selling land. So he's making this mill, and on January 24th, 1848, with the sawmill almost finished, Marshall looked down and later reported that he reached. So Marshall says this: I reached my hand down and picked it up and made my heart thump, for I was certain it was gold. The piece was about half the size and shape of a pea. Then I saw another. Then he saw another. Then he saw another. And then people started telling more people about it. So Horace Greeley of the New York Tribune said that fortune lies upon the surface of the earth as plentiful as the mud in our streets. We look for an addition within the next 4 years equal to at least 1,000 million, so $1 billion, to the gold in circulation. So, the secret does not stay at the mill. They can't control it. Somebody reports it to the San Francisco newspaper, and then it just travels all over the country and actually all over the world. Sorry, had a technical difficulty. So news of the gold was not spread, like I said, by Sutter and Marshall. It was spread by the merchant Samuel Brannan, who had just been passing through the mill Sutter's rising colony as he was making his own way to California. And then news spread to the East Coast and then was published in newspapers and again the world. And there was a lot of magical thinking about what it would mean to go to California. By magical thinking, I mean, like not in, we can rationally know now that they were nonsensical, but because there was so little information and that they could gather about where gold was and basically any information besides just looking for it and panning for it, the belief of what the gold would do just made people very I think a kind way of saying it is hopeful. So we can see here with some different advertisements that there are, they would call California a gold region. They would make some companies would sell basically all of the resources you could need to get from one part of the world to California. Again, the gold regions of California. They would give you a donkey. They would give you the basics of what you need. It was basically like an extractive cruise, like a 19th century extractive cruise. You could also take another one where I just really like this image. He's riding some sort of fish. He's waving a flag that says C for California, and maybe even also Cooley, the owner of the owner of the company, now that I think of it. But just this idea of California just being strewn with gold was just so tempting that many people could not resist. So by 1849, the gold was country was gripped in what was called gold fever, and farmers left their fields, merchants closed their shops, soldiers left their posts. Everybody made plans to go to California. So the California gold rush was a mass migration of people from eastern US and again all around the world looking for easy riches. They were called 49ers, and the gold seekers swelled the population of California from 14,000 in 1847 to 225,000 in 5 years. Early miners able to pan for gold, so who could get into areas where they believed gold was, would pan for gold along the rivers of Northern California, doing something called placer mining. So it was relatively easy to do that. You can see here, they you just need a little dish, and if you're fortunate, a little bit of a screen, and you too can try to strike rich. However, conditions, much like the Oregon and California trails, were super hard. And they didn't get any better in the mining camps. There was no law, so it was just mostly man, but not just man, every man for themselves. There was no sanitation, certainly no bathrooms, but also certain certainly no what is it, how do you say, uh legislated places to poop. There were no set outhouses. It was truly lawless. Also, the prices for food and supplies were very high because it was hard to get things there, and so people could charge whatever they wanted. And because the miners were, literally looking for gold, they could pay for things with the things they found in the ground. Um, because of this, however, again, bad hygiene, cholera and dysentery, as we we talked about before with the Oregon Trail, still rampant. Cholera and dysentery, not not fun, not a fun disease at all. A very bad way to go, especially if there are no sanitation laws. We will not get into what cholera and dysentery look like, but they do very much mess with your digestive system, is what I will say. So mining camps sprang up whenever or wherever enough people gathered to look for gold. So miners paid high prices for basic necessities because the large amounts of gold in circulation caused severe inflation in California. So, for example, a loaf of bread might cost 5 cents in the East, but it could sell for 50 to 75 cents in San Francisco. Sometimes eggs were more than $1 a piece. Just an egg. And yeah, the lure of gold attracted miners from all over the world. They were drawn to California and the hopes of striking it rich for themselves. We can see here, and hopefully you watched the video about Chinese Americans coming in for gold mining. Um, Between 1849 and 1853, about 24,000 Chinese men moved to California. In 1849 alone, about 20,000 immigrants arrived in California, not only from China, but also Europe, Mexico, and South America. And just need to put this in here. Levi Strauss, Levi's. I don't know if they're still cool in youth culture, but I am really excited whenever I find a pair of Levi's at my local Ross Dress for Less. Levi Strauss made his fortune from creating denim work pants during the gold rush. So we have a lot of that being said, we have a lot of businesses. We have Levi Strauss, like I said. We also have Wells Fargo, companies that are still with us. But we have other businesses and industries that really transformed California's economy. So farming and ranching became even more important. We had so many more people to feed, 225,000 in just 5 years. People needed to eat. So farming became especially important, in figuring out how to farm in places that were maybe not as conducive to farming. So, for example, the northern mountains, where a lot of mountains and coastal cliffs that the gold was being found in, were not typically conducive to having a whole bunch of livestock, or growing any kind of basic crops. But people tried. But a larger with the upsurgence of so many people coming to California, a an upsurgence of even more industrial economies really took place. The expansion of ranching and agriculture. Again, these people needed to eat. So also because of the isolation of the state, it's it at the time was the farthest away from the East Coast. It was literally the other coast. The isolation of the state made it difficult for businesses to bring in and ship out goods. So, as a result, there was a decision to bring railroads all the way to California, and eventually the Transcontinental Railroad was completed in 1869. So, you have railroads being you have railroads cutting through the entirety of what was then the whole of the United States. And they were able to do that fairly quickly in, 20 years. So when folks were done with mining, either because they hadn't found anything or they ran out of any money to try to dig out more money, they would participate in these other industries, like creating the railroad, like uh, like ranching, and try to, well, maybe not strike it rich, try to support themselves and create some sort of semblance of a California dream for themselves. I also just always want to point out that while prospectors, 49ers are primarily understood to be men, there were women out there who were also mining. Some were related or married to the miners, others just wanted to strike their own fortune and wanted to be independently wealthy. Um, and I think that that is another example of the potential and freedom that a lot of people ascribed in the 1840s and 1850s to California, and arguably still do. The frontier is understood as a place where anybody can achieve their dreams, even women, even different sorts of minorities. Of course, this is 1840s, 1850s is when chattel slavery is still illegal in the South, and therefore there were Black folks who did come to California, but because of racism and some of the just impossibilities of escaping slavery during this time, Black folks were not as common, but still present and need to be talked about. So we have towns that also speak to, illustrate this, the lawlessness of California during this period. One's called Hangtown. This is now Placerville. Gaujai, Rough and Ready, Whiskey Town, basically places to avoid if not for the gold. Whiskey Town is also still called Whiskey Town, and it is a national park site, not a national park, but a national park site. Um, Also, it experienced a horrible fire in 2018. So few miners got rich, but the merchants and service people actually made the better investment by trying to, not make the huge gamble of potentially finding gold. Not everybody found gold. Lots of people didn't. But the merchants and service people had to provide for everybody who was out there. And so that was the steady but more stable choice to make in order to have an investment. So when mining in the rivers, this placer mining played out, they started doing hard rock mining, which was even harder and more labor intensive to do, because placer mining is you have a pan and you just shake the water out to see if any gold settles. Hard rock mining was much harder labor, which you can see here. They're going into mountains and they're hoping to find collections of gold in in the actual mountain. So Hangtown Girls was mentioned in the textbook. I want to talk a little bit about Hangtown because there is a current controversy that we'll talk about in the next slide. But I wanted to just provide you with an example of some of the entertainment that and songs that people sang in these mining towns. So here it is. A little gold rush music for your Monday. No.
Hangtown girls, pumping rosy hair and ringlets mighty cold, painted cheeks and gassy blonde, touch them once they'll sting like home. Hangtown girls, lovely creatures, think they'll marry more than preachers. It's so bad, show their features. Hangtown girls. They're dreadful shy of 49ers, turn their noses up at miners, shocked to hear them say, "Oh, darn it!" Try to blush but cannot come it. Hangtown girls, lovely creatures, think they're married more than preachers. It's so bad, show their features. Hangtown girls. They'll catch a neighbor's cat and beat it, cut the bean in half to eat it. Promenade in silk and satin, cannot talk but murder Latin. Hangtown girls, lovely creatures, think they're married more than preachers. It's so bad, show their features. Hangtown girls, let's play the wobbly dance. On the street, they're always grinning. Modestly, they lift their linen. Petticoats all trimmed in lace, matching well their painted faces. Hangtown girls, lovely creatures, think they'll marry more than preachers. It's the bad, show their features. Hangtown girls, this is my favorite line. Go to church, they seldom venture. Hopes the Lord they cannot enter. Go with gals so young and tender, shun the pick and shovel gender. Hangtown girls, lovely creatures, think they'll marry more than preachers. It's so bad, show their features. Hangtown girls, let's play for the dance again. La 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 Hangtown girls are pumping rosy hair and ringlets mighty cold, painted cheeks and gassy blonde, touch them once they'll sting like gold. Hangtown girls, lovely creatures, think they'll marry more than preachers. It's the bad, show their features. Hangtown girls.
So Hangtown Girls was an adaptation of a song that already existed called New York Girls. But obviously it was adapted for more fitting a more fitting kind of milieu. They wanted to talk about the gold rush experience, but the message is still the same about women just trying to find a way to get through living in the mid 19th century. So Hangtown is a curious name with rough and ready, with gouge eye. We can kind of clearly know the story of those of maybe how those towns got the name, but Hangtown, that sounds rough and could be a couple different stories. So Hangtown is has now become Placerville, named after placer mining. But it's still historic Hangtown. They still have it in their town seal. Hangtown is because they had a few famous lynchings of Black people. And like some of the other arguments that have specifically been happening in the US South with or places that had slavery, there has been and continues to be a reckoning of what do we do with the past of the town. In Hangtown, which is so explicitly racist in today's eyes, with an actual lynching noose, um it can seem surprising that it is uh still a debate, and that they don't want to necessarily break ties with their Hangtown history. However, you can see on the Facebook page of Placerville, they really still lean into this old Hangtown image of themselves, and they are still in the process of trying to change their seal. It is a controversy that's still happening today. I'm actually in the process of getting involved with a documentarian who is uh, doing some work with Placerville, and actually the John Sutter Mill, which the uh, the creation of the park actually took land away from the family of a Black gold miner. Like I said, Black folks were still out there trying to make money just like the rest of them, and the California Park Service took away land through using eminent domain to it's a crazy story to make the park, and took it away from the son of the original miner. The son was in a nursing home. It was very messy, very bad, and so I've been working with the descendants of the original owner and the park to help understand that history better. Is actually hoping that one of them could join us today, but everybody was busy. So just for the sake of time, I'm gonna move this on. So the California Gold Rush obviously impacted San Francisco a lot, because more than half of the 49ers, especially because the Transcontinental Railroad wasn't finished until 1869, more than half of the 49ers came to California through San Francisco. So San Francisco boomed, and miners needed supplies. So San Francisco was the central location of where they bought from. And that is why San Francisco, while, Los Angeles and San Diego, Santa Barbara, they have they have markers still from the Mission period and the California time period. San Francisco is our California's most oldly established city because of this history. They were the first truly bustling city that the state of California had, in the way that people were coming in and out. There was a lot of economy happening, and the development of communities, but not just, a community, but multiple kinds of communities. We have a very historic and important Chinatown in San Francisco because of uh, not only Chinese miners, but also the families that they brought with them, and the different sorts of industries that they pursued in order to take care of those families. So here is a shot of the gold rush in San Francisco. You can see all of these ships out there. You can see the building, all of these different buildings. Again, most of what you're seeing that is built is made out of redwood because it was so ample. That is actually what is probably growing out there. So you, again, lots of natural extraction. It is, well, gold is the literal shiniest one. It is not the only one. So there's lots of effects that come with the California gold rush. So you have American miners forcing out Mexicans and Chinese miners to reduce their competition. So the federal government also participated in this. The legislature levied a $20 a month foreign, quote unquote, foreign miners tax to discourage miners from other countries. You would have to pay that $20 regardless of whether or not you were successful in finding things. So the stakes were high. It was not just a cut of your findings, it was like potentially a fee that you would have to pay that you may not have. $20 was a lot back then. Discouraged Chinese miners moved to San Francisco and, like I said, formed Chinatown. Native Americans, indigenous folks, either many died from European diseases or were hunted down by miners. As you heard, and as I in the video of Benjamin Madley talking about the American genocide, as we further talked about in week 2, this was a huge issue. So in 1870, the indigenous population declined from 150,000 as it was in 1860 to only 58,000 in 1870. And last but not least, we have, there was a question last week about where the word California comes from. And the word California actually has super duper deep roots, and it comes from a very old, I want to say 15th or 16th century novel called Las Sargas de Esplandian by Garcia Rodriguez Montalvo. I believe his pen name was also maybe Octavio Montalvo. At any rate, this is a fictional story that actually, it was likely inspired by North African Muslim mythology, which there was a Queen Khalifa or Khalifa who ruled a land of fantastic beasts, which we certainly did have as a state until they were all hunted down and pushed out, like grizzly bears. But the land was also only women, so it was a sort of what we would now more commonly consider an Amazonian kind of place. So the Califia, sorry, comes from the Arabic caliph or Khalifa, which means king or queen. There's also, like, some scholars argue that there's connections between an 11th century French poem, The Song of Roland. I don't personally find it too convincing. I think that it's really cool to think of it as a beautiful, wonderful, powerful North African woman who is just looking over and ruling a strange and beautiful land, which California has always been. So I hope, oh, yes, I did go over. I am so sorry. I'm going to stop recording right now. I'm going to stop sharing right now, and I'm going to stop recording.